And we are live on the Gamification Revolution. Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Gabe Zicker, and I'm coming to you from a lovely, though you can't tell exactly where we are because I'm inside, lovely Vancouver, Canada. And I'm joined today by my guest, Amy Jo Kim, who's coming to us from just outside of San Francisco. Hi, Amy Jo. Joined today by my guest, Amy Jo Kim, who's coming to us from just outside of San Francisco. Hi, Amy. Joined today by my guest, Amy Jo Kim. It's from just outside.
Hi there.
So glad to have you. And everybody, if it's your first time on the Gamification Revolutions Precap, please log in with one of your social profile accounts and you'll be able to actually ask us questions. You can type your questions into the question box. You can ask us questions actually through the video. You can even come on screen with your video camera and ask us questions. I know you're all probably very excited to be here. I'm excited to have you. And if you're a regular listener or viewer of the Gamification Revolution webinar, you know that you can subscribe to it now, apparently on iTunes, which is very exciting. I think Mac, our producer, has actually gone back and put up past episodes of GRev onto iTunes, and actually you can go back there and download them. You can also go back and watch those previous episodes of GRev on the gamification.co website. So it's actually very exciting. All the different options that you have for keeping in touch with us. But I'd love for you to subscribe to the podcast. It's a great way to keep up with all the latest in gamification and behavioral design and engineering. You can't miss it. It's amazing. So, Amy Jo, we've got you back. Can you hear us okay?
I can't because there's this
So, Amy Jo, we've
overlapping
got you back.
sound.
Can you hear us okay?
No, there's overlapping sound. So
We have some technical difficulties, everyone, apparently.
let me leave and come back and see if that fixes it.
I hope it fixes things. Um, we've got all the modern technology and the amazing Precap platform, but sometimes it's hard to make it work exactly right. So in the meantime, while we wait for Amy Jo to sort of reset for everyone, I do want to let you know about some exciting things that are happening that you all probably want to know about. So the first thing is, you know that coming up in November, there's this event called Gamification World Congress in Barcelona, and I'm going to be able to make it for the first time. Schedules work out, so I'm going to be speaking there at GWC this year, which should be very exciting for everyone. For those of you who are in Europe and interested in the subject of gamification, you're coming to GWC. Be sure to come by and catch my keynote there and all the other great sessions that are happening. I'm very excited to have an opportunity to be part of that. Should be very cool. And of course, you guys, it's not very hard to persuade me to go to Barcelona, and probably not hard to persuade any of you to go to Barcelona either. It's a really fantastic city, so I'm actually very excited to be there. Even though, or especially because it's November. Also, if you're not up on these things, you can be part of the project that gets gamification by design to my new book off the ground. You can actually contribute to the book and become one of the published writers on the book if your contribution is included in the finished version. And all you have to do that is go to gamificationbydesign.com, and from there you can actually add your add your input, add your comments to the book, and you can actually, in doing so, in this way, you can actually get yourself engaged with the subject of designing gamification and make your contribution. So all that stuff is very exciting. Um, I know that in the meantime, we've also got a lot of you who are here regularly. So it's nice to see many of you again. It's nice to see you, Lori and Tiago. Roman is here with us today. Hello, Ken, and Kim and Scott. Hi, everybody. It's amazing to have you all. It's amazing to have you all here with us again on GREV, which is very exciting. I also wanted to let you know that one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and one of the things that I would love to have your feedback on as part of the GREV community, is this idea of a kind of post loyalty situation that we're in. Because I feel like for many organizations, and this is a topic I'm sort of formulating an idea, I've been calling it post traumatic loyalty disorder. This idea that loyalty has become such a commoditized idea, it doesn't really mean anything anymore. And so I'm really curious to hear your thoughts and would love for you to weigh in on that topic with me on gamification.co. and on Twitter. I would love to hear your thoughts about this idea. I really feel like and I'm going to be talking to a bunch of people in the loyalty industry also over the next month, and I really want to hear your thoughts about how you feel loyalty has evolved over time and what those things mean. Looks like we have Amy Jo back. Can you hear us, Amy Jo?
I can hear you great. Can you hear me?
Oh yes, and you're back. It's so good to have you. Thanks for being here.
Yes,
Yay!
Ham.
Woohoo! Jazz hands.
No
Everybody,
echo. Hear you great. Good to be here.
it's amazing to have you. And of course, everybody knows, all the amazing contributions that you've made to game design and engagement, both theory and design over the years. And I know that you have this new, well, it's not exactly new. You've been working on it for a while called Getting to Alpha. That you've been working on with lots of different people. Do you want to tell folks a little bit about that program for starters and why you created it?
I'd love to. Thank you. So, thank you for that intro. And as most of you know, I've been doing game and product design hands-on for a long time. I've been an educator and also a doer working with teams and shipping products. And a couple of years ago, I got very frustrated because I had, developed my career to a certain point, and I had great clients who I worked with that I loved, but I was constantly wanting to clone myself, and I was getting a lot of requests from people that wanted my insight and my guidance and my services, my design services, but they didn't have necessarily the budget to hire me to, help lead their project, and they didn't have the time to go through the 3 or 4 or 6 months that I would usually engage with someone to get them from an idea to their alpha or beta product with validated, early adopters and all that stuff that I would do with private clients. So I had one client in particular I really, really wanted to work with, this awesome, fast-growing startup in the collaborative consumption space. And I couldn't serve his needs. And he said to me, if you took the things that you do and you could find a way to templatize them so that really smart, motivated clients like me could somehow time slice into what you do and get your great guidance, but in half the time and for half the money. And I said, oh, that's a nice idea. Yeah, half the time and then I started thinking, what if I could do that? What if I could figure out a way to deliver the results that I can deliver working hands-on, 20% of the time to get 80% of the way there? What if I could figure out a way, for the more budget conscious entrepreneurs and, for the people I can't take, what if I could figure out a way to get them amazing results in, 20% of the time? So I set about trying to do that because that's what this client asked me. And he was my first guinea pig. So I put together my very best shortcuts, the techniques that if I only have half the time and half the money and I'm very motivated to get something done on a project, something real and valuable, what would I do if I was in charge? Those shortcuts and hacks, I put them together into a program and I tried it on this client and he got amazing results. He went from idea to building a validated MVP, which turned into a big success with a pivot in the middle because they completely changed their idea of what their MVP should be in 5 weeks.
Okay.
And once I saw that, I said, oh, well, God, that's really valuable. So I started testing and iterating and tweaking the format and the hacks. And I tried them out. So far now I've run 19 teams through this online program with these design hacks. So I still do my one-on-one, more customized consulting. I still do on-site workshops for innovative companies, and I will engage doing product design for anywhere from 2 to 6 months on a new project. Usually that's collaborative gaming projects. But I've developed this other program, which is I have a 6-week program that's a coaching program, and I also have a 1-week masterclass that's an hour and a half a day for 1 week. And those are available to anybody, anywhere in the world. All happens online. And what I found is that I work a lot of times a distributed team will come and they say, we're not even in the same place. Can we work with you? And I say, you're my target audience. Because it's all on, because that's the way a lot of people work these days. They're not in one place. You yourself aren't where you usually are right now. So
So,
what I've been developing, just to sum it up,
yeah.
is a set of materials, templates, PDFs, videos, micro-chunked materials that gets people to create a really smart and validated idea and test it in just a few short weeks.
So this is the alpha in getting to alpha
Yes,
in the program,
that's
right?
right.
So basically, it's a your kind of product design expertise distilled down into this program.
Exactly. And a
So
lot of that product design expertise isn't just here's some great mechanics and here's some great dynamics. It's also the order in which you bring things to life in your product and why. And a lot of game design, for me, is actually as much about process and attitude as it is about particular mechanics.
well, that's actually a really interesting sort of observation because a lot of people who are trying to design and think about kind of building a new product, certainly building a successful product. Those early stages are often the hardest part, right? Really figuring out how we get to that first sort of
They
testing phase.
are. They
So,
are the hardest part.
so let me ask you one question that comes up a lot. And I really am curious to hear your answer to this. How early should people be considering user engagement slash gamification in the process of thinking about the alpha version or the MVP version of the product?
That is such a good question. So here's what you should do. User engagement slash, well, let's also define how we're using those terms because people
Okay.
use the term gamification to mean so many different things, as you know.
Yep.
Big umbrella term at this point. So user engagement is the heart of, first of all, I should say, my specialty is building long-term engagement. So people that are doing a short-term marketing campaign or a fad app that's meant to be there and be gone in a few weeks, my techniques are really overkill. So I'll just say that right up front. But
Okay.
if what you're trying to do is create an experience that drives longer-term engagement, okay, then the question is, how do you do that? And how early should you consider engagement or gamification? It's never too early to think about engagement, but the key thing is to actually be very clear on who your customers are, not just all your earliest customers, the people who most need and want the thing you're building, the people who would pay a lot of money and go to some trouble to get it because their need is so bad. Not the wannabes, not the curious, the people who need it. You start by really defining what that is, what your hypotheses about that, and what value you're providing to them. And then what I do up front before we've built anything, before we've built a prototype, is do some very guerrilla style and strategic customer insight to get insight about the current needs, desires, and daily habits of your customers. And then when you set about to design your first few prototypes, when you get to alpha, as it were, I have a framework using a core loop and a 4-stage framework. And you focus on the core loop. You focus on the habit building phase, not the onboarding, not the mastery, but the habit building phase. And you design the most stripped down core loop that still contains the seeds of the value you're delivering to your early customers. And up till then, you should not be thinking about gamification because gamification up till that point is a distraction. I would consider what I just described the beginning of smart gamification, which is, and many people do this. I know Bunchball does this. I know you probably do it on your project. People that are experienced, they start with strategy. What are your business goals? What are you trying to do? And then what I do is work with people to expand that to having very, very clear hypotheses about their customer experience and their customer needs. Once you've got that in place and you're able to test your core experience, That's when you start to put just the beginning elements of gamification in, starting with feedback systems before you would put in a progression system so that people know if they're on the right track, et cetera, et cetera. And I go into that in a lot of detail in my programs, both the master class and the coaching. And
So
the
is
thing that
there?
I've learned, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, no, go ahead. No, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
The thing that I've learned, I mean, I'm also basing this on really what you said. Early product design is really hard, and it can take a long time, and you can go down a lot of cul-de-sacs, and that's called learning. My goal is to get you your learning faster and to speed that up, which if you've got a substantial team, saves a ton of time and money. Very, very high leverage. The reason I care passionately about this is my own story. I've been in this spot so many times. I was unable to do the work. I was unable to get the results I wanted on projects. And so I was driven to find better solutions. But the thing that's really important to realize is that the reason that you want to bring the core of your product to life with the right early adopters first is that if that doesn't work, nothing else matters. I can't tell you the number of times someone has come to me with a really flawed product that they wanted to gamify. That's not going to save your product. The best gamification happens on top of a strong foundation of real value add for a very specific customer need, which
Right.
I would guess nobody's going to argue with that, right? But
No,
it's
no, sure.
really the how of that. Great, that sounds good. How exactly do you do that in a few weeks? That's where the techniques I've developed really
So
results we've been
here, I mean,
getting with startups.
I think this is kind of interesting. One of the most interesting things that you brought up was this idea of focusing on that core kind of behavioral loop at the very beginning of the experience, like thinking about that kind of habit formation phase. And so many people are talking about that kind of core behavior loop and that habit phase, when it comes to their products in a
Yeah,
very
and a lot of
specific
them
way.
are talking about that in a very operant conditioning and Skinner box way. A lot of the folks in the habit community. You know what I
So
mean?
what do you mean when you talk about it then?
Yeah, so I actually have some really awesome slides I'd love to share that bring that pick that apart, but we can certainly share some links at the end and folks can
Yeah.
go explore that on their own. So that's such a great point you brought up. So um, habit building is a big topic these days in the general design world, but also in gamification. And people like yourself, gamification experts, you've been thinking about habit building for years, right? There's a lot of techniques,
Sure.
but it's become very popular. There's a book called The Power of Habit a couple of years ago. That was an excellent book. Muriel's Hooked is basically the same material. And those are great popularizers. There's a habit design group that's offering, workshops in habit design, and there's a lot of talk about behavioral design. Okay,
Right.
and some of that is really great. A lot of it is great intro, no question, great intro. But here's the key difference between behavior design, or what I would call Skinner box design, and a core loop that's a game design. Very, very simple. You look at all of the habit building, your design material, it boils down to standard operant conditioning, which is there's a trigger, there's an action, and there's a reward. Okay? Trigger, action, reward, that's the core loop. You'll see it in the habit book, the core of Muriel's hook. That's operant conditioning. And that's where you're saying, we are going to shape human, rat, pigeon behavior, whatever we shape, with triggers and behaviors and feedback. And we're going to use uh, things, we're going to use patterns like variable reinforcement patterns or fixed reinforcement, which goes to variable, which is actually the one that works, but that's another conversation. And there's all these patterns, and I took behavior mod in psych, my undergraduate degrees in psych. I just took Pigeon Lab. Like I made the pigeons turn around in circles, and you can
Yeah.
do that. And that is what a lot of that is about. Is wow, operant conditioning shapes behavior. Let's go. Okay, so that's great. That's fantastic, but that's a short-term thing. And what people in game design and designers in general who design for long-term engagement all have figured out is that that backfires for long-term engagement. if what you do is you shape behavior with rewards in a behavior mod way, you will get shaped behavior, but you'll generally get drop off after a few weeks. People just,
Okay.
it stops being interesting. And probably the number of failed gamification projects that drop off after 1 to 1.5 months tells you a lot about that. Another interesting stat is that that's when all the Zynga games that were popular, Farmville, Cityville, etc. Great games, but very Skinner box-like. That was their drop-off, except for the whales. Month and a half, about 6 weeks. So that's interesting. So you say, well, why is that? What's missing? Simple. What's missing is skill building and personal empowerment and a system that helps you get better at something that matters to you. That's the heart of game design. And the difference, it's a crucial difference between behavior design and saying, I'm going to grab the tools of behavior design and use them to shape my gamified product and my program, which is game design. The key difference is that it's based around skill building and mastery and moving toward mastery.
So, okay, well, and that's great. And I think one of the most powerful kind of, insights, certainly that I've heard you talk about and that, people really respond to when you talk about that. So now let's connect up to the very early stages of product design. So at the very kind of beginning, how important is thinking through that mastery progression and that mastery system from the get-go? Because I think when people, especially when people are thinking about doing a startup and doing like a new product, they're like, I can't think about any of that stuff right now because I don't have, product market
Well,
fit. I've got to get to product market fit.
that is actually, you just answered the question in the way I would have. So right at the beginning, before you're at product market fit, when you're building your core loop, you can think about mastery a little bit. You can imagine it, but actually you should not be thinking about it very much then. You should be thinking about your core product experience. Think about the day 21 experience, not the onboarding. Think about once someone's learned the ropes, assume we can get them to learn the ropes. Don't worry about if you're making fancy onboarding for learning the ropes first, you're on the wrong track. What you need to do is say, what's the day 21 experience? What's the repeatable, engaging activity that's going to pull people back? And the core feedback system that keeps them pulling back. Just that is the first thing. What's the internal trigger that drives them to it? Not the external trigger, that comes later. The internal trigger that's going to, is it, like for Twitter, the internal trigger is, I'm between projects, I need a break, or I'm procrastinating, I have this big deliverable, wait, I'll go check Twitter, that's the trigger. It's not getting notifications. But really understanding the internal trigger, that the moment in someone's life that they are going to use your product and what that means to them, what they're seeking. I use a technique called job stories and habit stories, which comes out of the Jobs to be Done framework to help you crystallize that. But a lot of the early focused guerrilla style customer insight research I have helped my clients do actually gives you insight into that. And so you can ask questions like, what is going to be displaced by my product? What is it someone's already doing that they're going to use my product instead of? What moment in their day is going to be made better by using their product? Don't assume people are going to make a new habit for using your product. Assume you're going to fit into an existing habit and make it better. What does that look like? And
Right.
if you start with those questions and then it's overwhelming because, well, there's the learning and there's the mastery. So don't think about mastery. Don't think about the onboarding at the first. Maybe think about it a little. And I actually get people to think about it a little. So you think about it a little, just enough that you can write on one page, no more, the story of how you go from discovery to onboarding to habit building to mastery, just at the highest level, 1 or 2 sentences per. Now, then you drill in on the core loop. You drill in on the habit building, and you sketch that out, and you get that right, and you bring it to life in an iterative loop with your early adopters, your early customers. And then you expand out, and you work more on onboarding, and you make that nicer, because you'll need that to grow your audience. And the secret about mastery and about delivering and developing your mastery system, all the fun stuff that we think about with gamification, is that smartest way to do that is actually to co-develop it with your early customers. Because your early customers, if you learn from them right, your early customers are going to Still hear me, Gabe?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Your early customers are going to give you the clues and the feedback you need to create the right mastery system. And that's something that it took me many, many years to learn. When I was earlier in my career, when I was first designing games and so excited about it, I would get very excited about mastery systems and about levels and balancing and all of that. And it wasn't until I got much more sophisticated and worked with really sophisticated groups like the Rock Band group and the Sims and the Covet Fashion teams that I realized that the people who I could learn from and that were my heroes and that they brought me in to supplement their already amazing team, right? When I worked with them, we weren't working on mastery systems at the beginning. We were really hammering on that core loop for months. So the people that
So,
built hit, that's what they do.
well, here's a kind of interesting question though that comes up a lot, I think, for people, and I'm curious to sort of hear your thoughts on it. Roman Rackwitz in the chat kind of sort of asked this question. So this all makes sense when you can get to clarity about there being just like kind of one behavioral loop, and Twitter's sort of an interesting example because there really is like just kind of one behavior in Twitter really that we kind of generally think about. But what about in products where there's by definition kind of side stuff that's happening alongside of it? Do we want to think about some of those side loops,
Sure.
let's say?
Well, do you mean side loops or do you mean ecosystems and marketplaces with multiple actors with different goals? Because they're
Well,
both relevant.
let's talk. Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about both of them. So let's start with the loop side of it.
So
What
with
if my
side
use
loops,
case
so
for my
here's the
product?
thing with
Yeah,
side. So first of all, every real game I work on has much more sophisticated loops and multiple interlocking loops. So
yeah,
that happens all the time. And the way that you do it is you still focus on your core loop. It's just that your core loop is a chain of activities. Like in Farmville or in, say, Clash of Clans, which is a more recent example. It's, build up your troops and then attack your neighbor and then build up your your defenses. So when they attack you back, you can get them back and you end up playing this great game of I'll get you this time, you'll get me next time. But there's a chain of activities that forms the core loop of that. And in
right,
Rock Band, the chain of activities is like, choose a song, play a song, get your feedback, get your response, choose another song if you're in a campaign or if you're at a party, round robin, someone else chooses it. There's a chain of activities in
right,
a game usually. So the thing about all the side stuff is that stuff's important. But if you're asking that, what about all the side stuff when you're trying to get your core loop in place, then you are shooting yourself in the foot. Because the biggest problem I see people make, and not just me, but when I talk to experienced game designers who coach and who teach teams, who've worked with dozens of teams, right, like me, I hear the same thing from them. Some of them are men, some are women. I hear the same thing from them, which is the biggest problem that people make is they get very excited about their design and about all the parts of their design, and they can't bear to just create and test and iterate and tune the most core loop. So my answer to all the side loops is those come after you tune the core loop. And if they're part of the core loop, they're part of the core loop. But if you can't identify the core loop, then you have a problem. And part of why creating an MVP is so hard is it's actually not that easy to identify the core loop. But if you can't, you have a problem. And part of what I do with people is I help them sort through and, say, okay, that's a side loop and that's great. But is
right,
that, and I had a client I worked with this spring, really interesting client. They weren't making a game, but they were making a geolocated deals app out of Canada. Very smart, serial entrepreneurs. They knew what they were doing. And they originally came to me for gamification, and they quickly realized that what they wanted was this thing that we're talking about. So they had a great idea and they had some rudimentary prototypes, but they really hadn't, in a disciplined way, talked to their audience enough to hone in on one, who are our real early customers? Because they knew their stuff would be really exciting to lots of people. Then the question
right.
is, who are the first 20 people, right? So we found those people, and then they did this very disciplined speed interview technique. And what happened was they had like all these ideas, and like you were just saying, they were really having trouble figuring out their core loop because they had so many good ideas. And they said there isn't one core loop, and the minimum viable product is these 10 features, and etc. At the end of 6 weeks, they actually had their core loop. But you know what? We had made 5 potential core loops and analyzed them. Core loop could be this, core loop could be this, core loop could be that. And we had actually looked at 3 different potential early audiences and gotten some data to hone in on the most promising ones. And then when we honed in on the most promising core loop, they set about building it, and I still worked with them. And then they were like, oh, we're making it bigger. This board member says we need this feature, and then we took it back out.
Right.
That's how it goes. That's the reality. Very iterative. But a couple of key points from that story. One, we got a small handful of vetted early adopters into our feedback loop uncomfortably early, very early. It doesn't mean we did what they said. It means that in the feedback streams coming into our product design decisions, one of those feedback streams was coming from vetted early adopters, and it was coming early. And the second thing is, if you feel like, oh, there's so much here, if you're fine with that, go ahead and build your product with all the different loops. My advice is get your core loop going first and refine it, and then add the other things in to that strong foundation. You will have a much better shot at success.
So this is super, super interesting. And I have kind of one last really sort of, I guess, kind of meaty question for you, Amy Jo, because you have like all this deep experience and that's all baked into your, getting to alpha program, which is getting the number 2 alpha.com. So a lot of what you're talking about in terms of clarity, in terms of distilling things down and getting to this core loop and really refining that behavior is sort of an amalgam of the best of kind of like, early iterative product design thinking, but with some kind of game design thinking sort of baked in there. And you sort of, kind of fly out at 50,000 feet from that. On the product design, often launching, you see people launch startups, with very tight product loops. But on the game side, people tend not to launch products with such limited, behaviors. Like generally speaking, games launch with many different behaviors and lots of sort of side loops in there. What's your advice to people for sort of navigating that balance between too little and not enough, which is, I think, uh,
yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to repeat myself because um, it has to do with the order in which you do things. And I think part of what makes what I'm doing game design thinking and not just design thinking and not just lean startup is that it really comes out of the order in which you do things when you're building a game, not just any old product. And so games do launch with all those side loops. Let me just take a really crystal clear example, Rock Band. Rock Band's something a lot of people played, and we all think Rock Band is like a part of our landscape now. But there was a time when Rock Band didn't exist. And that was when I met Alex Rogopoulos, the CEO of Harmonix, and he asked me to help them bring it to life. And Rock Band has a lot of sophisticated side loops and wonderful progression. I love the progression. It's so aspirational and over the top. And it's got all of that. It's got all of that. For the first 6 months of working with Rock Band, all we did was tune the chord of playing a song and getting, those feedback. Gabe, have you ever played Rock Band? Yeah.
sure.
So the feedback.
I'm not very good at it, but yeah.
The feedback systems inside of a song
Mm-hmm.
that tell you how you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
All the different ones, the visuals, the things that light up, the feedback on the screen, all that stuff, all that feedback. That's at least 6 months of upfront tuning. None of those side loops were added until we got that core loop right. So you say, how do you balance it? What you do is, if games have to have a core loop. You have to start, games are systems. And to bring a system to life, you need to, complex systems all start as simple systems that work.
So, I think that's such a great insight. If you had to And a lot of times, you think about a lot, you really help a lot of startups, but you also talk sometimes about helping kind of bigger companies. Can bigger companies take advantage of the things that you talk about in this
Oh,
program and
yeah.
your kind of, your clear product development
Thank
expertise?
you for asking. Yes, I do work with a lot of startups. I work with a lot of gaming studios as well, like great studios like CrowdStalk. Um, but I have several programs that work great for larger companies. Some of the larger companies I have helped are Telstra in Australia. They're the largest telecommunications company in Australia. I've worked with Tesco, the UK company, Disney, the New York Times. These are all companies I've helped with these techniques.
Can they use
And what,
can they use
yes,
getting to alpha, or
excuse me?
can they use the getting to alpha program?
And who uses it?
Like large
Oh,
companies, could they join
yes.
your
Yeah,
program?
so large companies can absolutely join the Getting to Alpha program. Large companies usually I've found, want something more customized and personalized. So let me tell you about the 3 ways that companies and individuals can interact with me. I have a group coaching program that's
Okay.
for teams. A team anywhere from 2 to 10 people can join my group coaching program. That's kicking off next week, by the way. Registration opens on Monday, closes on Friday. It's a 6-week program. A large company who has a team in that program can absolutely join that program. I also have a master class in November that's 1 week online, and that's for individuals. So if a team wanted to join, they would buy a set of seats. And that's also for large companies, particularly people that want to get the basics and get the tools and then use them internally. But the program that mostly works for large companies is my workshop with follow-up. Let me tell you about that. So what I've done, I did this for Tesco, I did it for Telstra, I did it for Disney and New York Times, all those companies, is I have an engagement where I start with a very customized on-site or online, if it makes sense, workshop that's an overview of the whole program for as many people in the company as they want to educate. So it's really intense, deep dive, immersive, the tools, the background, the psychology, all of that. And then hands-on exercises where we actually get some work done. And then I follow up with them for at least a month. If they want more, it's fine. And all the teams who went with it, who went through that and are working on the project, I coach them as they apply the tools and the templates and the techniques so that we can customize it and really get it working inside of their company. And I found for big companies, when I do it that way, it often takes, and they continue to then use those tools to continue to accelerate their progress months after I've left.
Which is cool. Can I ask you one final question? I know I said it's the final question, but this final. Tiago has a question from the chat, which is about player types. So going back to your kind of previous example, you were talking about that startup and having 3 or 5 different possible sets of players that you might users that you were initially kind of thinking about as you figure out who the right kind of early adopter audience is. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of deciding which group we're targeting and how we figure out the sort of motivational states of those people?
That is such a good question, and it's a big topic. But I'll give you a trailer for what the answer is.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
Yeah, sure.
so a couple of things. One is I find it much more useful to think about habit stories than player types, and let me tell you why. And I've written about this on my blog. I have videos about it. You can go read up on it. But player types in the sense of, Bartle's player types or the player types I've written about, people often think of those as personas. And personas are a useful tool, but if you're in a hurry and you're trying to cut to the chase and get to the heart of motivation, I find it much more useful to write what I call habit stories or job stories that describe the motivational profile of the people that you're trying to reach. Okay? I'll give you some links
Sure.
afterwards. People can go read up on that. But it kind of cuts through the need for player types. Okay, so that's one thing, and it's a shortcut. It's a shortcut that really helps you translate customer insight into design decisions. So secondly, the second thing I'll
Right.
say is when we talk about thinking about different people. I mean, you can think about player types, and that's useful. But in my work, I work a lot with marketplaces and ecosystems that have, say, a buyer and a seller, or that have, or a community that's got, creators of content and consumers of content. And those are not really player types. Those are, I would call those roles, ecosystem roles within, within your product. And for that, what I found really, really useful, and so and you can still use this for player types if that's working for you with what you're doing. What I found really useful is to create parallel analyses. And I've got a set of design techniques. Again, they're shortcuts, they're hacks. And one of them is called the MVP canvas. And we all love canvases. There's lots of canvases. This one is very specific to early product design. It's just exactly the questions you need to answer to be strategic and smart about your early product design. So what I have people do is I have them fill out, no matter where they are. Some of my clients come to me, by the way, they're at beta. This is a very typical client. It's not just for people who haven't built anything. Let's say you're at beta, you built something, it's awesome, and you and your team have a list of 25 things you'd like to add to it before you ship, and you know you should only add 3. And you're trying to figure out how to figure out which 3. That's a typical client who'll come to me and use my system to help them focus on the right 3, for instance. So with that in mind, if what you're trying to do is really focus in, what I find really useful is make 3 different canvases to start, one for each of your players. So for instance, recently I worked with an educational gaming company, fast-growing startup. They have 300 or so employees. And they have an innovation team inside of their company that's building their next generation product. And they have aggressive schedules. They have a very ambitious product. And now they're starting to actually have to meet their goals and get stuff up and, have their alpha doing. And so they've been using my system along with their own internal smarts to accelerate what they're doing. So here's what we did. Well, at the beginning, we sat down and we said, okay, what are your goals? They had 10 mini games and they needed to figure out which 3 they should get ready for testing for their upcoming play test in, 3 weeks. So we said, okay, who are the players? Well, there's 3 players in that situation. There's the children who actually use the software. There's parents who oversee that if the child's using it at home. And then there's teachers who use the software in the classroom. Each of them has a different point of view, a different motivation, and a different set of needs, right? Yep. So what we did was we did a canvas for each of them and looked at that and put it clearly. And then we designed a core loop. Well, there's other steps between the canvas and the core loop. We made a habit story for each of them. And we did speed interviews with each of those people. And then we took all those insights and we made several different core loops. And then it was pretty clear to us where the overlap was after we had done that. So then we said, okay, we're going to start marching forward. And, meanwhile, we were building and testing prototypes of the game. And all of that led up to a really clean prototype of, I think it was even 1 game that we built out first. And then 2 more came very soon. But we were basing it on the combined insights that we had gotten from the strategic exercise of focusing and clarifying our hypotheses. Because the analysis up front is really, you're clarifying your hypotheses. And then what you're doing is testing it.
Right.
But you're doing it with gaming smarts. I mean, that's what a good game designer does. If you've ever, worked on a game that has to ship that has my friend Jesse Shell, I interviewed him the other day for my podcast, which, by the way, is launching next week. Hooray! I'll let you know all about that. But I interviewed him the other day, and he's telling me about pre-production and how they're in pre-production on this new game. They're running all kinds of small, high-learning experiments, just like the kind I'm telling you about. And they're not doing it because they read a book on lean startup. They're doing it because they have a budget, they have a timeline, they have a client, and they need to test whether the technology they want to use is actually going to work, right?
And yes, and I think it's and I think if there's if there's a need to actually get, you from that idea or from that start process, whether you've got that budget and the client set up or not, to alpha.com where folks sign up. They've got about 3 days left, right, before before the first program begins, plus all those other ways of getting to you. And they can follow you, Amy Jo, on Twitter at Amy Jo, AMYJO Kim. Thanks so much, Amy Jo, for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thanks for the great questions, everyone, and especially Gabe. Thanks for having me and letting me address your audience. It's really gratifying, and I hope that any of you who want to reach out and let me know your questions. Let me know what you're working on. I'd love to hear from you.
Yes, and so they can follow you on Twitter. You're very responsive over there. And just as a final note, Dawn did comment on your beautiful wedding quilt as well. And thanks so much for that. And thanks so much for all of you for joining us today on the Gamification Revolution. Join us regularly Thursdays at 1 o'clock Eastern for more topics about gamification, user engagement. And you can follow me on Twitter at GZakerm. Thanks so much, everyone. Talk to you soon. In the meantime, keep having fun.
Bye-bye.